Bacterial Contamination. She's our target. Miku overheard a group of girls whisper as she walked past him in the halls of school. The black and red-haired girl sighed and continued walking. Miku had been bullied and hurt ever since the day she transferred to this school. She hated it more than anything else she had ever experienced. She was called ugly, so she dyed her hair from green to red and black. After she did so, she was still called ugly. As the bell rang for the end of the day, Miku stood up and glanced at the two girls. The girls turned away their heads and began walking out the door. "Doesn't she get on her nerves?" one of the girls whispered as they left. Miku frowned, grabbed her books as she walked out. She made her way to her home. As she walked down the street, the group of girls she saw in the hallway were there, as if they had been waiting for her. Miku looked at them and blinked. She gave them a fake smile and began backing away. "You aren't going anywhere," one of the girls said, grabbing Miku by the wrist and bringing her back into the center of the group. "I thought we've decided we are going to ignore her," a short girl snorted. "We will, after we teach her a lesson and embarrass anyone involved with her," a taller girl smirked. "Huh?" Miku frowned. "Aw, she looks confused," the short one laughed. Miku began backing away again, when one of them kicked her as she fell to the ground. Miku said as she landed. "Kick her eyes!" The group cheered as the tallest girl began to beat Miku. Miku looked helpless at the girl. "Don't look at me like that!" she yelled, kicking Miku in the left eye with her toes. Miku let out a cry and brought up her hands to her eye, which was throbbing. Next, the whole group moved in and began kicking and laughing. After they finally stopped, a tall girl stood over the sobbing girl and said, "Kill yourself." And with that, she spat on the injured girl and walked off with her friends. Miku cried for help, but no one came. She tried to move, but it hurt too bad. For hours, Miku lay on the dark, cold street, crying to herself. She was in pain, and she had no one. She was alone. Miku cried and cried. It took her hours to pull herself together, and when she did, she looked around her. There were bugs. She screamed. She had a phobia of bugs. As she stared and screamed, the bugs approached her and began crawling on her into her mouth. She tried to cough them out, but she was choking, and they were down her throat. She thought she was going to die. "It hurts! It hurts! It hurts!" Miku thought to herself, lying hopelessly. The bugs crawled inside of her body and began eating her away. Miku screamed as the bugs pushed her eyes from out of her head. The pain was unbearable. She could feel them eat her arms, legs. She couldn't stand the feeling. So, she passed out. When the girl awoke, she could breathe again. She could see. There was no more bugs inside of her body. Something was weird though. She could see millions of things outside of her left eye. She looked down and noticed she had weird claws of some sort coming out of her mouth. After she got a hold of herself, she realized that she was still in pain. Her mouth hurt, so did her arms and legs. She had a terrible headache as if something was emerging from her skull. She felt as if her bottom jaw, arms and legs were missing. Miku tried to move, and as she could, she stood up and noticed that she was much taller than she was last night. She looked down at her legs. What she saw terrified her. Her legs were replaced with legs of bugs. So were her arms. She took a step. It felt fine. She walked away from the city. She wanted to cry as she thought that she would never be able to return. Miku turned and ran away to the mountains. The devastated girl looked at the reflection in a pond. She had never seen something as scary as herself. Her bottom jaw was missing. Her small bug legs and arms had grown out from behind the top teeth. Her hair had gone to a green color it was. There was a bug growing out of her skull. Her left eye was completely red, as if it were the eye of a bug. Her right eye was a greenish blue, but she knew it wasn't her regular eye. Her hands were claws, but her body felt unreal, like she was living in the body of a robot now. She stared at the reflection. I felt a single tear run down at what was left of her face. She stood up and wiped her face with the long bony arm. Her new arm was rough, and it hurt when she touched her fragile face. She sighed and looked up at the clear blue sky. I've been contaminated by bacteria, Miku thought to herself. I got stuck in a situation, she finished, looking down at her long backward legs. She tried to let out a small cry, but she couldn't. She had no bottom jaw, and her throat was sealed shut by some type of black substance. She felt a hot stream of tears flow out of her right eye, but nothing came from the left. She didn't understand why, but she didn't care. 2 months later. Don't you feel bad that she actually killed herself? A girl with the name of Yui asked. I don't regret a thing. She really pissed me off, a tall, slim girl replied. But aren't you the one that beat her the night before she disappeared? Yui stated, looking up at the tall girl as they walked down the hall of school. The tall one, with the name of Megumi, shrugged his shoulders. Yui looked down at her feet. I feel bad for her, even though we never met. Yui didn't finish. How could you feel sorry? She was horrible, Megumi snapped. How would you know? She never spoke to anyone, Yui yelled. Megumi stopped in the hall and turned her face to Yui. Yui turned and looked up at Megumi. Shut up, or I'll beat you too, the tall girl said, slapping Yui across the face. Yui thought to herself as she walked home. It was dark and cold outside. No one else was around. At least, that was what she thought. She continued walking until she had a twig from behind her snap. Who's there? Yui asked, stopping in her tracks. There was no reply. Yui then turned around. She was terrified at the sight. There, in front of Yui, stood a tall creature who was insanely skinny and had long, flowing green hair tied in pigtails. Yui blinked. Miku? She whispered. The creature kneeled down to Yui and nodded her head. Yui held out a hand to Miku. I'm sorry. This all happened to you. I truly am. she confessed. Miku stood up straight and blinked a good eye. She is lying. Nobody cares about me, Miku thought to herself. I'm so sorry. Yui looked at Miku's face with tears in her eyes. Why isn't she scared of me? Miku wondered. Please, forgive them, Yui said as tears made their way down her soft cheeks. Miku put her claw gently on Yui's head, as if she was thanking Yui. She smiled, as she did. Miku quickly backed away. No one cared for me, Miku repeated in her head. You aren't worth believing, Miku decided as she set her right back claw on Yui's head and rubbed her hair ferociously. Yui collapsed to the ground as she suddenly felt sick. Miku walked past the girl. I'm sorry. She was very kind. I promised to apologize, Miku thought as she continued to walk down the street. Yui began coughing. Her throat was burning. What did she do to me? Yui said to herself as she coughed and her eyes began to water. It hurts! It hurts! Yui yelled as her eyes fell out of her head. Hearing this, the only words Miku could think of were contaminated by bacteria. The following day, as Miku hid in the thick trees behind the park, she heard the two female adults talking about Yui committing suicide. That's when Miku realized she could contaminate anyone and anything just by coming in contact with them. If she could still smile, she would, because she knew how to get her revenge. Of course not, Megumi said into the phone as she and her posse were walking to lunch. Who was that? The short, chubby one, named Ichigo, asked when Megumi shut her phone. My boyfriend. He was asking if we were the ones who made Yui commit suicide? Megumi replied, rolling her eyes. Why are people committing suicide now? It's good that Miku did, but Yui wasn't that bad. The pretty one named Mei started. I don't know. I slapped Yui yesterday because she was taking Miku's side. That's no reason to commit suicide. Right? Megumi blinked. The other shrugged. It was evening. Mei and her boyfriend, who were taking a walk by the cliffs. It's nice out here, don't you think? Mei said, looking up at the orange-pink sky. Yeah, just the two of us, Sho replied with a smile. Oh, how wrong Sho was. They were never alone. Miku was watching them from behind a bush, waiting for her chance to contaminate. Mei, Miku thought to herself. The one who kicked me in the jaw. She finished. Let's see what it looks like when her jaw falls off. Sho, I think someone followed us up here, Mei complained, clinging to the boy's arm. Why would you think that? Sho asked. I just feel like something is watching us, Mei whispered, looking back into the bush. Miku was hid well enough that they couldn't see her, but she could see them. Miku watched as Sho hugged Mei and tried to comfort her. That's when Miku stood up. She watched as Mei's jaw dropped and she let out a loud scream. Sho quickly turned around, facing Miku. Miku tilted her head at the boy, letting her hair fall off her face. Oh my god! Mei began. Miku? She finished. Miku nodded her head as she approached the two. Every time she inched closer, she could see that they were starting to feel sick. "Get away!" Sho yelled. Miku ignored him and kept inching closer and closer. Sho decided to run at her. Miku could feel herself laugh as she swatted him with a claw and he fell off the cliff. "Sho!" Mai yelled. "I thought you were dead!" Mai whined, looking back at Miku. The green-haired creature shook her head innocently. "Please, don't hurt me. It wasn't even my idea to beat you up." Mai fell to the ground as tears rolled down her cheeks into the brown dirt. Miku rolled her eyes. "Then why did you break my jaw?" Miku thought to herself. She watched as Mai cried. Miku took the claw and began writing in the dirt. Mai looked up, her face hot from tears. "Wanna join me then?" Miku wrote. Mai read it and looked up at what was left of Miku. "Really?" Mai whispered. Miku nodded her head. "Well, no! I still hate you! You just murdered my boyfriend!" Mai scolded. Miku struck her claw back into the dirt. "That's too bad," she wrote. "What are you talking about?" Mai asked. Miku walked until she was standing right in front of Mai. Mai blinked and she suddenly felt hot. Miku closed her eyes as she was smiling and backed away. The creature watched as sweat rolled down Mai's face and her whole body turned red. "What the hell?" Mai panted. She looked up at Miku. Miku began to write. "Remember when you broke my jaw? You wanna know how it felt?" The green-haired girl wrote. Mai shook her head as she wrapped her arms around her stomach. She coughed a little, then puked. Miku watched as Mai began puking her guts out. Miku walked over to the girl and lifted her head up. Mai looked into her eyes as some of her insides hung out of her mouth. Miku became angry and punched her in the jaw. Mai's jaw flew across the dirt and landed into a bush. Mai tried to scream, but her throat was clogged with her intestines and blood. Miku picked the girl up by the neck. Mai cried as both her eyes began turning red. A small antenna poked out of her forehead. A fly, Miku thought to herself, dropping Mai back into the dirt. Mai let out a cry that was barely audible. She struggled to stand up. Mai turned and gave Miku a disgusted look as she jumped off the cliff. Miku flipped her pigtails with one of her long bony arms and walked away. "Another suicide? My, what has our world come to?" an elderly lady said as she walked down the street while reading the newspaper. Miku stood at the back of the alley. She was waiting for one of the group members to exit the store so she could follow her home. Miku thought about killing that elderly lady. She had always been taught to respect the elderly, but Miku yearned for revenge. She understood that the elderly lady had done nothing to her, but she realized that she felt better when she contaminated others. She began to believe that if she continued to contaminate, she could go back to her regular self. The creature sighed and forced herself not to hurt the old woman. "Mai committed suicide?" Ichigo said to Megumi as they spoke over the phone. "I know, it's not her fault though. Do you think Sho did anything to her?" Megumi asked, holding her blanket close to her chest, as the moonlight shined into her room. "I don't know. The police said that Sho was there too. Could they have both committed suicide for some reason?" Ichigo explained, biting the nail of her thumb. Do you think Miku could be cursing us? Megumi shivered at the thought. I don't know. Have you talked to Rika lately? She has been skipping school ever since Miku killed herself. Ichigo asked, stuffing a cupcake into a small face. Yeah, she said she feels like she's been watched. The night was cold. There was snow falling lightly from the clouds above. Rika sat in a warm room, reading a book. She had an uneasy feeling, as if someone or something was watching her. Rika yawned and looked out of her window, putting a book down on her lap. She looked at the snow, covered the grounds, and noticed footsteps. Not human footsteps. They looked like giant claws. Like a dinosaur had been walking around. Rika raised an eyebrow and stood up, walking over to the window. She put a hand to the gold glass and looked out into the darkness. Footsteps led to a front door. Rika blinked. Then she heard the front door downstairs slam. The girl ran into her bed and hid under the blankets. She felt safe, though she knew she wasn't. The house was quiet for a while. Rika decided to peek out from under the blankets. She pulled the sheets under her nose and looked around. She saw nothing, until eyes made their way to the doorway. She couldn't make out features due to the darkness, but Rika saw the outline of a tall creature. Rika clasped her hand over her mouth, trying not to scream. She lost it when she saw the long strands of hair tied in pigtails on the creature. Rika screamed so loud that her throat hurt. Oh, Miku! I'm so sorry! Forgive me! Rika cried, putting her sheets back over her head. Miku switched the lights on. Rika, the one who stomped my arms and legs, she thought. I will never forgive you for that, she finished. Miku looked down at the shivering girl, relying on her sheets to protect her. How stupid, Miku thought to herself while rolling her eyes. Spare me! I'm sorry, I really am. It wasn't my idea, Rika cried. Miku approached the girl and ripped the sheets off her bed. Rika kicked at the air and shut her eyes, not wanting to make eye contact. Miku took a claws and opened Rika's eyes, forcing the girl to look up at the creature. Rika screamed and cried. Miku looked intently at the girl, as she noticed the areas her claw was touching was starting to make Rika's skin rot. Rika! The girl's mother yelled, running into her room. Oh! Rika's mom stopped at the sight of Miku, touching Rika's face with a large claw. Rika's mother watched in fear as the bacteria spread on Rika's face, causing all of her face to turn a blackish purple color. Rika! The mother cried. Mika looked over at her bony shoulder at her mother, who had baggy eyelids and looked very old. Is she the elderly lady I saw in town today? Miku wondered. Rika's screaming increased as the skin on her face rotted and fell off. Please stop! The mother yelled, still standing in the doorway. Miku shook her head at the woman as she dug her claws into Rika's face. Rika screamed as blood leaked out of her veins. Miku finally let go of the girl's face and watched as the bacteria spread in her body, causing everything to rot. Rika! The woman cried. Miku turned and faced the woman. Then she approached her and appealed her against the wall. The woman screamed in the process. I should have killed you earlier, Miku thought, as her claws dug through the woman's stomach. Eventually, her claw had gone all the way through and was touching the wall. Miku watched as the woman coughed up blood and her eyes rolled back into her head. Miku pulled her claw back and the woman fell to the floor, lifeless. She turned her attention back to Rika, who was turning into a spider. Miku watched as more eyes popped out of the girl's forehead, as stubby legs popped out of her sides. Rika screamed and ran to the window, jumping out and falling to meet her death. Days became months, and soon, not many people were left in town. They were all contaminated and killed themselves with her grace. Miku surprisingly was feeling a bit better, but not a lot. She wasn't satisfied, for Megumi was still alive. Miku spent days following her, but she wanted to surprise her. It happened while Megumi was sitting on the floor in the bathroom, painting her nails. She was smiling, even after all her friends committed suicide. Miku watched her from outside the window. Once Megumi finished painting her index finger on her right hand, Miku jumped through the glass and grabbed Megumi by the waist. Megumi stared at Miku and smirked. So, you came back from the dead to get revenge? Well, you're not going to kill me that easily, she said, holding up a kitchen knife. Miku felt her throat tingle. She realized that she was laughing. Idiot, you plan to stab me to death, even though I've already contaminated you, Miku thought, as Megumi stabbed Miku's arms. The knife had no effect, for Miku's arms were bones. She watched as the bacteria began eating away Megumi's flesh. Megumi bit her lip, trying not to scream, for she didn't want to lose to Miku, though she knew she already was. Miku then threw Megumi onto the ground and watched as her arms, legs, bottom jaw, and eyes fell off her body. Megumi screamed. Miku continued staring as Megumi slowly began turning into the creature Miku had been. Miku quickly walked over to her and stomped on her body until her stomach exploded and sent blood everywhere. Miku did this because she knew that Megumi would just contaminate Miku again if she let her live. A few days later, Miku's hair drained back to the red and black. Her arms and legs grew back. The claws from her mouth fell off, and her jaw grew back. And she returned to the regular height. Her eyes didn't go back to normal though. Lately, I've been feeling better, Miku said, as she talked to the doctor in Tokyo. I transmitted it to her. Miku grinned as the doctor stared. Miku laughed in a chaotic way that scared the doctor. She's been contaminated by bacteria. Thank you all so much for listening to tonight's story. Now I'd like to take a moment to thank all of my Patreons who helped make this channel possible. Thank you, Breaker19, for all your help and support. You guys are amazing.